Ia Cthulhu Fatagan. Ia Cthulhu Fatagan. Ia Cthulhu Fatagan. That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange eons even death may die. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Unnamed Horror with Hanu and Retrokaiser. I'm Hanu, and that is Retrokaiser. Say hi to the folks.
Those two names throwing the shit out of me. But anyway.
And an Ia Cthulhu Fatagan for all. Yes, I remember to say it this time.
Woo!
All right, hey. But yes, welcome back to the Unnamed Horror. This is part 2 of the Dunwich Horror. All right.
Ooh.
Yes, this is the H.P. Lovecraft story podcast where I read an H.P. Lovecraft story and Retrokaiser makes funny sounds and observations and jokes and
yep.
And belches into the microphone just as we start.
No, that was just Cthulhu eating one of his sacrifices.
Oh, yeah. But hey, I do want to get your opinion on this. I recorded a new intro for us for this two-parter, so I sent it to you. You hadn't listened to it yet, but if I can send it to you over Skype real quick. I want to hear what do you think about it.
Live reaction time. Okay, let's listen to it.
Ia Cthulhu Fatagan. Ia Cthulhu Fatagan.
Got a bit of a stomach problem going on there.
Ia Cthulhu Fatagan. That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange eons even death may die.
Good to know. There we go.
So what did you think about it?
Spooky.
Yeah, I've mixed some influences from, I've used clips from that Cradle Filth song, and I've used bits from one of the movies, from one of the Lovecraft movies. And so I mixed a little bit of that, and then, I had that one where I was just saying the that is not dead, which can eternal lie thing, but with my voice, like artificially lowered. But I decided like now. Let's do a little thing. By the way, the thing that you hear when I'm doing the that is not dead, which can eternal lie thing, that's a cello, if you're wondering what that sound was. So, yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I like doing little things like that.
Should we... Sorry, you continue first. I'm talking over the host again.
I didn't have anything else to say, but it's nice because the previous intro, which was me just saying the that is not dead which can eternal lie line, but then with my voice Cthulhu-fied, which was to say like putting the pitch way down low, like that was a bit of a rush job, and it worked for the couple of episodes.
Who says Cthulhu sounds like that? You could sound like Kermit the Frog, we don't know.
Oh yeah. Oh, and speaking of audio, I was supposed to tell you about that. Yeah. So I've already edited the first half together. And I did a little thing in Chapter 5 whenever Wilbur Whately speaks. I did a little audio trickery with my voice. I mean, I did manage to get it pretty low, but I thought, like, let's make it, like, extra low, so, it fits the story better. So I've done a little bit of audio trickery with that one. And, yeah, again, I had that thing happen. Luckily, I didn't repeat my mistake from Herbert West. Remember when I accidentally deleted it and lost half the podcast when I was editing part 1 of Herbert West? I luckily didn't do that, but I did have to do that where I had to chop up the... I had to edit the podcast in pieces because the recording was quite long. All right, so we are up to Chapter 6 now of the Dunwich.
Should we do a quick recap of what happened previously?
All right, last time on the Dunwich Horror.
I'll do it.
All right.
Last time on the Dunwich Horror, ugly woman gives birth to ugly baby who becomes obsessed with ugly things.
Oh, God. Hey, Stephen Lynch. That was the guy who did the Ugly Baby song.
Yeah.
But you know what I did? I actually listened to it after our podcast. I realized something. I was singing not the album version. I was singing the live version because the lyrics are slightly different. She's skinny like a twig, at least her nuts are big, but her hair color doesn't match her beard. But that's not in the album version. In the album version, it ends with, but the placenta's more cuter than she. Like Lynch did a lot of really mean-spirited like joke songs. Like one of these other ones are the Special Olympics, and then but his Satan song, the Beelzebub song, that one is cute. I highly recommend that one. That's really funny. Yeah. Yeah, but he was really big during like early YouTube days, and I think he kind of petered out around 2014. Like he hasn't done a lot since. So I don't know, maybe. But I think that kind of happens with a lot of like stand-up comedians. That's unfortunate. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Speaking of Lynch, sorry, this is turning into a long introduction, but I do want to talk about this because it has to do with horror. So, Mr. David Lynch, the film director, of course, passed away probably over a month ago already. But yeah, so I finally decided to get off my ass and finally get around to watching his movies because his movies have been on my bucket list for the longest time. Yesterday, I finally watched Eraserhead.
Nice.
It was pretty fucking creepy. Highly recommended it. Highly recommend. I mean, it is a horror movie. Like it's not just like a artsy movie that's supposed to be scary, but it's just legit a straight up horror movie.
That's slightly porn. It's a complete mindfuck of a movie. That's what it is.
Yeah, but I really like the main actor in it, the Henry guy. Like I just loved his performance, and there is an awkward comedy to it as well. It's a very slow burn, I will warn, though. The first 15 minutes, like, almost nothing happens in that, so just get ready for that. All right, but I think that's enough meandering around. I've been meaning to get into a lot more Lynch. I don't know if I mentioned it. Oh, I mentioned this probably in a Let's Play. I actually did see his, like, Dune movie finally last year. So now I've seen, like, 3 of his films. I still have a long ways to go, but I'm finally making some progress on that front. Yeah, but hey, enough meandering. Let's finally get on with the story of the Dunwich Horror, continuing with Chapter 6. Here we go. The Dunwich Horror itself came between Lammas and the equinox of 1928. Why a sheep sound?
That was supposed to be llamas.
Llamas. Oh. Okay. That was actually kind of funny because lammas, Lammas, is actually how you write sheep in Finnish. So that was. But I don't think.
Sorry, I'm not that clever, honey.
Yeah. But that took me by surprise. I thought that was, or maybe that was a callback to the Black Cat. Who knows? Check that out. That's in our Poecast, where we read an Edgar Allan Poe story. Okay. Yeah. All right. And Dr. Armitage was among those who witnessed its monstrous prologue. He had.
Oh, look at that.
He had heard, meanwhile, of Whately's grotesque trip to Cambridge.
Ah!
And of his frantic efforts to borrow or copy from the Necronomicon at the Widener Library. Those efforts had been in vain, since Armitage had issued warnings of the keenest intensity to all librarians having charge of the dreaded volume. Us librarians gotta stick together, eh? Wilbur.
Wait, dreaded volume in a library? Oh, come on. Doesn't he know to be quiet in those places?
Wilbur had been shockingly nervous at Cambridge, anxious for the book, yet almost equally anxious to get home again, as if he feared the results of being away long. Early in August, the half-expected outcome developed, and in the small hours of the 3rd, Dr. Armitage was awakened suddenly by the wild, fierce cries of some gigantic hound. No, of the savage watchdog. and that was a callback to our TheHande reading.
Yep.
On the college campus. Deep and terrible, the snarling, half-mad growls and barks continued. Always in mounting volume. but with hideously significant pauses. Then there... Then there rang out a scream from a wholly different throat.
Jesus!
Wilbur's balls dropped. No. Such a scream as roused half the sleepers of Arkham and haunted their dreams ever afterward. Such a scream as could come from no being born of earth or wholly of earth. Holy is a kind, or Holly is kind of a W-H-O-L-L-Y. That's a hard word because I'm never quite sure how to quite say it. Yeah. Yeah. Armitage, hastening into some clothing and rushing across the street, and lawn to the college buildings, saw that others were ahead of him and heard the echoes of a burglar alarm. Still shrilling from the library, an open window showed black and gaping in the moonlight. What had come had indeed completed its entrance, for the barking and the screaming, now fast fading into a mixed low growling and moaning, proceeded unmistakably from within. Some instinct warned Armitage that what was taking place was not a thing for unfortified eyes to see. So put on those safety glasses. Sorry.
Oh, you're going blind.
That took me by surprise, the whole unfortified. So he brushed back the crowd with authority.
Back off!
As he unlocked the vestibule door. Among the others, he saw Professor Warren Rice and Dr. Francis Morgan.
Hey, how are you doing?
The men to whom he had told some of his conjectures and misgivings, and these two he motioned to accompany him inside.
Plump, 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 plump.
The inward sounds, except for a watchful droning whine from the dog. Scooby, are you okay? Had by this time... Zoinks! Had by this time quite subsided, but Armitage now perceived with a sudden start that a loud chorus of whippoorwills among the shrubbery had commenced a damnably rhythmical piping.
Ding, ding.
That was more like a bell, but okay. As if in unison with the last breaths of a dying man. The building was full and frightful... the building was full of a frightful stench, which Dr. Armitage knew too well, and the three men rushed across the hall to the small genealogical reading room. The small genealogical... Sorry, that was a bit of a bad misreading. The small genealogical reading room, whence the low whining came. For a second, nobody dared to turn on the light. Then Armitage summoned up his courage and snapped the switch.
It needs some WD-40, that switch.
Definitely. One of the three, it is not certain which, shrieked aloud at what sprawled before them among disordered tables and overturned chairs. It was one of the Three Stooges. No. Professor Rice declares that he wholly lost consciousness for an instant, though he did not stumble or fall. That's a hell of a trick. Oh, hey, I just remembered. Yeah. I'm having a little problem with the book slipping, but I remembered that I took the dust cover off last time, so I'm going to do that now. Yeah. All right. Okay.
Take it off.
Now that's a chant I wasn't expecting in a Lovecraft podcast, but okay. Gonna have to put an age restriction on this one. The thing that lay half bent on its side in a fetid pool of greenish yellow ichor and tarry stickiness was almost 9 feet tall, and the dog had torn off all the clothing and some of the skin. It was not quite dead, but twitched silently and spasmodically, while its chest heaved in monstrous unison with the mad piping of the expectant whippoorwills outside. Bits of shoe leather and fragments of apparel were scattered about the room, and just inside the window an empty canvas sack lay where it had evidently been thrown. Near the central desk... Near the central desk, a revolver had fallen, a dented but discharged cartridge, later explaining why it had not been fired. The thing itself, however, crowded out all other images at the time.
Mother, what are you doing here?
It would be trite and not wholly accurate to say that no human pen could describe it, but one may properly say that it could not be vividly visualized by anyone whose ideas of aspects and contour are too closely bound up with the common life forms of this planet. And of the 3 known dimensions, it was partly human, beyond a doubt, but very man-like hands and head, and the goatish, chinless face had the stamp of the weightless upon it. But the torso and the lower parts of the body were teratologically fabulous. Okay.
Again, says it's indescribable, and yet
proceeds to describe it. Yeah. Yeah, that's well. That is what the narrator's getting at. Like it's difficult to do justice to, but I'm gonna try anyway. Gosh darn it. Okay.
He's hideous, but fabulous.
Yeah. So that only generous clothing could ever have enabled it to walk on Earth unchallenged or uneradicated. Above the waist it was semi-anthropomorphic, though its chest, where the dog's rending paws still rested watchfully, had the leathery, reticulated hide of a crocodile or alligator.
Snap! Crikey!
The back was piebald. Whoa! Really?
Whoa!
Yeah, piebald with yellow and black and dimly suggested the squeamish covering of certain snakes. Okay, hey,
you're making me hungry.
Hey, let's do a little quick Dr. Google here.
Yes.
I want to check out that word piebald. Exactly like it would spelled just one word, but like pie and bald, as in somebody who doesn't have hair.
Here we go. I got an answer right away.
Yep.
Piebald or pied animal is one that has a pattern of unpigmented spots, white on a pigmented background, or basically it's got like a spotty pattern to it, like a Dalmatian.
Ah, wow, that's a cool word. I mean, I can see why it's
like how you see a horse. You know how you see a horse, and sometimes it's like not just one color, but it's got like spots of other colors on it.
Yeah. I get that. That's cool. But yeah, so that's funny. I mean, that's a cool expression, but I can see why it's fallen out of use because it's not very like it's not like very flattering sounding. Okay.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. I'm just reading where the word came from. It says, yes, I'm reading Wikipedia, like every YouTuber does, but the word piebald originates from a combination of pie, from magpie, and bold, meaning white patch or spot.
All right, yeah, exactly. Oh, by the way, I did double check because we ran into a bit of a dead end with the bullock last time, and yeah, bullock is just an ox that's been neutered. So it's like, so it can't have babies, but it's meant for like.
So it's like a Munich.
Yeah, exactly. So but yeah, then bull is just short end for that. Yeah, which is funny because we actually do in Finnish also have like 2 separate words for, an ox. A male cow that still has its bits and doesn't have its bits. I can't remember which one is which, so I'm not gonna say. But we have 2 different words for bull as well.
One is called One is probably called butcher's meat, and its bits are probably all over the place.
No, no, I mean that same as you would have a bull and an ox. We have 2 different words for that animal in Finnish, but yeah, which are separated by whether or not it's still got its cherries, if you will. Okay, but let's move on with the story. Below the waist, though, it was the worst. I heard you giggling, and then it clicked for me. Okay, yeah, all right. Here, all human resemblance left off, and sheer fantasy began. And fantasy again with the PH. Yeah. Lovecraft loved spelling it that way. The skin was thickly covered with coarse black fur, and from the abdomen a score of long greenish-gray tentacles with red sucking mouths protruded limply.
This book has been brought to you by Manscaped.
Oh boy. Their arrangement was odd and seemed to follow the symmetries of some cosmic geometry unknown to Earth or the solar system. On each of the hips, deep and set in a kind of pinkish ciliated orbit, was what seemed to be a rudimentary eye, whilst in lieu of a tail there depended a kind of trunk or feeler with purple annular markings. And with many evidences of being an undeveloped mouth or throat. I think I am going to have to put that age warning because some people might find this sexy. There are freaks like that out there. The limbs, save for their black fur, roughly resemble the hind legs of prehistoric Earth's giant saurians. And
I gotta love those giant saurians, so sexy.
And terminated in ridgy veined pads that were neither hooves nor claws. I did not need to read the word veined there. When the thing breathed, its tail and tentacles rhythmically changed color as if from some circulatory cause normal to the non-human side of its ancestry. In the tentacles, this was observable as a deepening of the greenish tinge, whilst in the tail it was a manifest... It was manifest as a yellowish appearance which altered with a sickly grayish white in the spaces between the purple rings. Of genuine blood there was none, only the fetid greenish-yellow ichor, which trickled along the painted floor beyond the radius of the stickiness and left a curious discoloration behind. As the presence of the three men seemed to rouse the dying thing, it began to mumble without turning or raising its head. Dr. Armitage made no written record of its mouthings, but asserts confidently that nothing in English was uttered. At first...
Ay, caramba!
At first the syllables defied all correlation with any speech of Earth, but towards the last of these came some disjointed fragments evidently taken from the Necronomicon, the monstrous blasphemy in quest of which the thing had perished. These fragments, as Armitage recalls them, ran something like
Nagaya, Nagaga, Bugshogog, Uya, Yogsortath, Yogsortath.
Yes?
Which translates to, you got your knee in my crotch, ouch.
Oh, but I kind of cracked up on the Nagaga.
Oh, the pop star.
Ora na na na. Oh boy, I wish I had thought about that joke, but yeah, that's too late now. Okay.
Yeah.
They trailed off into nothingness as the whippoorwills shrieked in rhythmical crescendos of unholy anticipation.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh,
Then came a halt in the gasping, and the dog raised its head in a long, lumbrous howl.
Huh?
Lagrubi. Yeah.
Groovy.
Lugubrious. Yeah. A change came over the yellow goatish face of the prostrate thing, and the great black eyes fell in appallingly. Outside the window, the shrilling of the whippoorwills had suddenly ceased, and above the murmurs of the gathering crowd there came the sound of panic-struck whirring and fluttering. Against the moon, vast clouds of feathery watchers rose and raced from sight, frantic at which they had sought for prey. All at once the dog started up abruptly, gave a frightening bark,
Woof.
and leaped nervously out the window by which it had entered.
Whoa!
A cry rose from the crowd, and Dr. Armitage shouted to the men outside that no one must be admitted till the police or medical examiner came. He was thankful that the windows were just too high to permit of peering in, and drew the dark curtains carefully down over each one.
Yes.
No sound effect? Okay. By this time, 2 policemen had arrived.
Hello.
Dr. Morgan, meeting them in the vestibule, was urging them for their own sakes to postpone entrance to the stench-filled reading room till the examiner came and the prostate thing could be covered up.
Prostate thing? Hi.
Prostrate, sorry, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Meanwhile, frightful changes were taking place on the floor. One need not describe the kind or rate of shrinkage and disintegration that occurred before the eyes of Dr. Armitage and Professor Rice, but it is permissible to say that, aside
Must have been cold that night.
from the external appearance of face and hands, the really human element of Wilbur Whately must have been very small. Oh, God. I know they're just talking about his upper torso with the human element, but god damn if that wouldn't be like another great nickname for your penis. Wow. Hey baby, let me show you my human element. When the medical examiner came, there was only a sticky whitish mass on the painted board.
Oh no!
And the monstrous odor had nearly disappeared. Apparently, Whately had no skull or bony skeleton, at least in any true or stable sense. He had taken somewhat after his unknown father. Oh, God. Wow. Wow, that chapter took a bit of a turn. Oh, God. Okay. Jesus Christ, we got still 4 to go. Okay.
Will I be as sexy as the previous chapter?
I doubt it. Wait, like Wilbur's already dead. So, but there will be something interesting that will happen next. Okay, let's continue with the story. Yet, all this was only the prologue to the actual Dunwich Horror. Formalities were gone through by bewildered officials. Abnormal details were duly kept from press and public, and men were sent to Dunwich and Aylesbury to look up property and notify any who might
look in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. No, we're just sent here out of the government's way.
And notify any who might be the heirs of Wilbur Whately. And by the way, I don't know if it comes through, but I always have a little mental break with Aylesbury because it's spelled A-Y-L-E-S Berry, and that A-Y, I'm never quite sure how to say it until I see the second syllable, and then I realized, like, oh, Ailes. Okay. They found the countryside in great agitation.
Ooh!
Both because of the growing rumblings beneath the domed hills, and because of the unwonted stench and the surging, lapping sounds which came increasingly from the great empty shell formed by Whately's boarded-up farmhouse. Earl Sawyer, who tended the horse and cattle during Wilbur's absence, had developed a woefully acute case of nerves. The officials devised excuses not to enter the noisome boarded place, and were glad to confine their survey to the deceased's living quarters, the newly mended sheds, to a single visit. They filed a ponderous report at the courthouse in Aylesbury, and litigations concerning the airship are said to be still in progress among the innumerable Whateleys, decayed and undecayed, of the upper Miskatonic Valley. An almost interminable manuscript in strange characters, written in a huge ledger and adjudged a sort of diary, because of the spacing and the variations of ink and penmanship, presented a baffling puzzle to those who found it on the old bureau, which served as its owner's desk. After a week of debate, it was sent to Miskatonic University, together with the deceased's collection of strange books, for study and possible translation. But even the best linguists soon saw that it was not likely to be unriddled with ease. No trace of the ancient gold with which Wilbur and old Whately always paid their debts had yet been discovered. It was in the dark of September 9th that the horror broke loose. The hill noises had been very pronounced during the evening, and dogs barked frantically all night. Early risers Early risers on the 10th noticed a peculiar stench in the air. About 7 o'clock, Luther Brown, the hired boy at George Corey's, between Cold Spring Glen and the village, rushed frenziedly back from his morning trip to the 10-acre meadow with the cows. He was almost convulsed with fright as he stumbled into the kitchen. And in the yard outside, with no less frightened herd, were pawing and lowing pitifully. Having followed the boy back in the panic they shared with him. So the cows followed him inside. Wow. Between gasps, Luther tried to stammer out his tale to Mrs. Corey. "Up there in the rut beyond the glen, Miss Corey, they'd something been there. It smells like thunder, and old bushes and little trees is pushed back from the rut like they'd a house been moved along of it. And that ain't the worst." Wait, how old was this guy?
Old enough to have cows.
Hired boy. I'm doing. It sounds like I'm doing my old prospector voice, but that's the only way I can read this dialogue. "And that ain't the worst. Nothing. What? Nother." Okay. Oh, and that ain't the worst nother. They's prints in the rud, Miss Corey. Great round prints as big as barrel heads, all sunk down deep in like an elephant had been long. Only they sighed more nor 4 feet could I make. I looked at one and 2 or 4 on, and I see every one is covered with land spreading out from one place, like as if big palm leaf fans. Twicked and 3 times as big as any they is. He'd been pounded down into the rud, and the smell was awful, like like it wet around Wizard Whately's old house.
That's not very nice.
By the way, I haven't been commenting on the way that this, dialogue is written here, but house spelled Haouse. House. Here he faltered and seemed to shiver afresh with the fright that had sent him flying home. Mrs. Corey, unable to extract more information, began telephoning the neighbors,
Ring.
thus starting on its round the overture of panic that heralded the major terrors. Overture. Wow. Good one. That was a smart joke there, yeah. When she got Sally Sawyer, housekeeper at Seth Bishop's, the nearest place to Whately's, it became her turn to listen instead of transmit. That's a funny way to say it.
That oddly sounds sexist. I don't know why, but it does.
Oh. Okay. For Sally's boy Chauncey, who slept poorly, had been up on the hill toward Whately's, and had dashed back in terror after one look at the place and the pasturage where the bishop's cows had been left out all night. Yes, Miss Corey, came Sally's tremulous. Oh, okay. Yes, Miss Corey. Oh, God. Okay, I'll try to do that voice, but yeah, I don't think. Came Sally's tremulous voice over the party wire. Wow, I love these old. No, well, he's talking about the telephone, but yeah. Yes, Miss Corey. Jancy's just come back a posting and couldn't have talk for being scared. He says old Whately's house is all blowed up with the timber scattered around like they'd been dynamite inside. Only the bottom floor ain't through. but it's all covered with kind of tar-like stuff that smells awful and drips down, often in ages, onto ground while the side timbers is blown away. And there's awful kind of marks in the yard, too. Sorry, this punctuation is kind of throwing me off, so that's why the words are coming out a bit.
Hi, I'm Mark, and I'm also Mark, and we are the terrible Marks.
Great round marks, bigger around than a hog's head, and all sticky with stuff like is on the blowed up house.
Oh no! What did they do? What did they do to that pig?
Jancy, he says they leads off into the meadows, where a great swath wider than a barn is matted down, and all the stone walls tumbled every which way, wherever it goes. Man, wow, she got a lot of dialogue. The next couple of, paragraphs are all this. And he says he, Miss Corey, and how he sought to look for such cows, frightened as he was, and found him in the upper pasture, nigh in Devil's Hop Yard, in an awful shape. Half of 'em clean
gone. Triangle.
Half of 'em clean gone, and nice half of them that's left is socked most dry o' blood, with sores on him, like they's been on Whately's cattle ever since Lavinia's black brat was born. Seth, he's gone ain't out now to look at him, though I'll vow he won't I can't make out this fucking sentence. Won't care to get very nigh Wizard Whately's. Chancey didn't look careful to see where the big matted douse swath led arter it left the pasturage. But he says he thinks it pined towards the Glenrod to the village. I tell you, Miss Corey, there's something abroad as hadn't oughter be abroad. And I, for one, think that Black Wilbur Whately has come to the bad end deserved. He deserved. Is at the bottom of the breeding of it. He wanted all human himself. I allows says to everybody, and think he and old Whately must raise something in that there nailed-up house, as ain't even so human as he was. They's allus been unseen things around Dunwich, living things, as ain't human and ain't good for human folks. The ground was a-talking last night, and towards morning chance...
Hello, I'm the ground.
Towards morning chance he heard the whippoorwills as loud as Cold Spring Glen. He couldn't sleep none.
Oh, so loud outside, I can't sleep.
He then thought he heard another fan-like sound over toward Wizard Whately's. A kind of ripping a tearing of wood.
Oh, beavers.
Like some big box of crate or being opened fur off. What with this and that, and he didn't get to sleep at all till sunup, and no sooner was he up this morning, but he's got to go over to Whately's and see what's the matter. He sees enough.
I'd definitely have to go if I heard sounds like that during the night.
Yeah. He see enough. I tell you, Miss Corey, that this done me no good, and I think as all the men folks ought to get up a party and do something.
Wahoo! Party!
I know something awful's about, and feel my time is nigh, though only God knows just what it is. Did your Luther take account of where them big tracks led to? No? Well, Miss Corey, if they was on the glen right this side of Glen, and ain't got to your house yet, I calculate they must go into the glen itself. They would do that. I says Cold Spring Glen ain't no healthy nor decent place. The whippoorwills and fireflies there never did act like they was great creators of God, and they's them as says ye can hear strange things a rushing and a talking in the air down there. If ye stand in the right place atween the rock falls and bears den. Oh, God. Oof. And that's the end of that passage. The chapter's not over yet, but I gotta...
I was about to say, I bet her phone bill was large with all that dialogue.
Women be yapping, I say. Women be yapping. Wait, yeah, it was Chris Rock who does it in the Nutty Professor, when he's like, women be shopping. By that noon, fully 3/4 of the men and boys of Dunwich were trooping over the roads and meadows between the new-made Whately ruins and the Cold Spring Glen, examining in horror the vast monstrous prints and the maimed Bishop cattle, the strange noisome wreck of the farmhouse and the bruised matted vegetation in the fields and roadsides. Whatever had burst loose upon the world had assuredly gone down into the great sinister ravine, for all the trees on the banks were bent and broken, and the great avenue had been gouged in the precipice-hanging underbrush. It was as though a house launched by an avalanche had slid down through the tangled growths of the almost vertical slope. From below no sound came, but only a distant, undefinable feeder. And it is not to be wondered at that the men prefer to stay on the edge and argue. Okay? rather than
fighting words.
Rather than descend and beard beard? Really? The unknown cyclopean horror in the lair. Beard. That's what that says. Okay.
Talking about a hairy situation.
Well, that is a verb. Is it like... It can't be from boar. From bear, because bear's last... the past tense would be boar, so... Like beard.
Hillbilly talk.
Okay.
Beard.
Okay.
Actually,
let
me look it up.
All right,
Let's see.
I think that might be just a straight-up typo. Unless that is like the old way to spell it. Beard and verb. Maybe add that verb.
Beard and verb. A growth of hair on the chin, on lower cheeks, and on a man's face, and sometimes on a woman's.
That's the noun. That's the noun. What's the verb?
That's the noun.
Yeah.
Verb. Boldly confront or challenge.
Okay. All right. Then it makes sense. All right. I just wasn't familiar with that phrase in this context. 3 dogs that were with the party...
Woof, woof, meow.
Had barked, and the cat apparently had barked furiously at the first, but seemed to cowed and reluctant when they near the glen. Someone telephoned the news to the Aylesbury Transcript, but the editor, accustomed to the wild tales from Dunwich, did no more than concoct a humorous paragraph about it.
Oh no!
Wow, what a dick! An item soon afterwards reproduced by the Associated Press. Really? Okay. That night, everyone went home, and
I believe that's what's called. She became a meme.
That night, everyone went home, and every house and barn was barricaded as stoutly as possible. Needless to say, needless to say, no cattle were allowed to remain in the open pasturage.
You stay there, you little cow.
About 2 in the morning. A frightful stench and savage barking of the dogs awakened the household at Elmer Fry's. I knew that was coming. On the eastern edge of Cold Spring Glen. All agreed that they could hear a sort of muffled swishing and lapping sound from somewhere outside. Mrs. Fry proposed telephoning the neighbors, and Elmer was about to agree when the noise of splintering wood burst in upon their deliberations. It came apparently from the barn, and was quickly followed by a hideous screaming and stamping among the cattle.
Moo! Slap.
The dogs slavered and crouched close to the feet of the fear-numbed family. Fry lit a lantern through force of habit, but knew it would be death to go out into the black farmyard. The children and the womenfolk whimpered, kept from screaming by some obscure vestigial instinct of defense which told them their lives depended on silence. At last, the noise of the cattle subsided to a pitiful moaning, and a great snapping, crashing, and crackling ensued. The Frys huddled together in the sitting room. They did not dare to move until the last echoes died away far down in Cold Spring Glen. Then, amidst the dismal moans from the stable and the demonic piping of late whippoorwills in the glen, Selina Fry tottered to the telephone and spread what news she could of the second phase of the horror. The next day, all the countryside was in a panic. And cowed, uncommunicative groups came and went where the fiendish thing had occurred. 2 titan swaths of destruction stenched from the glen to the Fry farmyard. Monstrous prints covered the bare patches of ground, and one side of the old red barn had completely caved in. Of the cattle, only a quarter could be found and identified.
Ooh.
Some of these were in curious fragments, and all that survived had to be shot. Earl Sawyer suggested that help be asked from Aylesbury or Arkham, but others maintained that it would be of no use. Old Zebulon Whately. Wow, that's a great name. That can't be a real name. Is it? Hey, quickly, Dr. Google, is Zebulon a real name?
It's Hebrew.
Oh, is it? Oh,
Yeah.
Well, you know what? That actually makes sense because, in the Deep South, they're like, super hyper religious, so they tend to have biblical names. Okay, cool. Old Zebulon Whately. Yeah, it's not all Jebediahs and what have you. All right. Of a branch that hovered about halfway between soundness and decadence, made darkly wild suggestions about rites that ought to be practiced on the hilltops. He came to a line. It came of a line where tradition ran strong, and his memories of chantings in the great stone circle were not altogether connected with Wilbur and his grandfather. Darkness fell upon the stricken countryside, too passive to organize for a real defense. In a few cases, closely related families would band together and watch in the gloom under one roof, but in general, there was only a repetition of the barricading of the night before, and a futile, ineffective gesture of loading muskets and setting pitchforks handily about. Nothing, however, occurred except some hill noises, and when the day came there were many who hoped that the new horror had gone as swiftly as it had come. There were even bold souls who proposed an offensive expedition down in the glen, though they did not venture to set an actual example, the still reluctant majority. When night came again, the barricading was repeated, though there was less huddling together of families. In the morning, both the Fry and the Seth Bishop households reported excitement among the dogs and vague sounds and stenches from afar.
Touchdown!
While early explorers noted with horror a fresh set of monstrous tracks in the road skirting Sentinel Hill. As before, the sides of the road shewed a bruising indicative of the blasphemously stupendous bulk of the horror, whilst the confirmation of the tracks seemed to argue a passage in 2 directions, as if the moving mountain had come from Cold Spring Glen and returned to it along the same path. At the base of the hill, a 30-foot swath of crushed shrubbery saplings led steeply upward, and the seekers gasped when they saw that even the most...
Oh, the leaves are brown, and the sky is gray.
Even the
Not
most...
those seekers?
Even the most perpendicular places did not deflect the inexorable trail. Woof, that's a hard word. Whatever the horror was, it could scale a sheer stony cliff of almost complete verticality, and as the investigators climbed around to the hill's summit by safer routes, they saw that the trail ended, or rather reversed, there. It was here that the Whateleys used to build their hellish fires and chant their hellish rituals by the table-like stone on May Even Hallow Mass. Now, that...
Put your left hand in, you put your left hand out, put your left hand in, and you shake it all about.
Now that very stone formed the center of a vast space thrashed around by the mountainous horror, whilst upon its slightly concave surface was a thick and fetid deposit of the same tarry stickiness observed on the floor of the ruined Whately farmhouse when the horror escaped.
Gold. Black gold, Texas tea.
I doubt it was that, but men looked at one another and muttered.
Hey!
Then they looked down the hill. Apparently the horror had descended by a route much the same as that of its ascent. To speculate was futile. Reason, logic, and normal ideas of motivation stood confounded. Only old Zebulon, who... I love that name. I mean, we did establish that it was Hebrew, but it sounds like such a sci-fi name, actually, yeah.
It sounds like a He-Man villain.
Oh, yeah, a little bit, yeah, doesn't it? Yeah. Old Zebulon, who was not with the group, could have done justice to the situation or suggested a plausible explanation. Thursday night began much like the others, but it ended less happily. The whippoorwills in the glen had screamed with such unusual persistence that many could not sleep. And about 3 a.m. all the party telephones rang tremulously. Well, at this age, it would definitely be more of a ring, yeah. Oh, man, yeah. Wow, that was a blast from the past. Okay. Those who took down their receivers heard a fright-mad voice shriek out, "Help! Oh, my God!" And some thought a crashing sound followed, and...
Apparently they were listening to James Brown over the phone, honey.
Followed the breaking off of the exclamation. There was nothing more. No one dared do anything, and no one knew until morning whence the call came. Then those who had heard it called everyone on the line and found that only the Frys did not reply. The truth appeared an hour later.
Sorry. Apparently the Frys did not reply.
Yeah.
Just the weird image of just French fries not talking.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's one of those things. Fry was probably just a very normal last name at the early part of the 20th century. And now that we only think about French fries, that's the reason why a modern author would not use that last name, except for that specific joke. The truth appeared an hour later when a hastily assembled group of armed men trudged out to the fry place at the head of the glen.
Oh, have a double serving, please.
It was
We're already hungry.
It was horrible, yet hardly a surprise. There were more swats and monstrous prints, but there was no longer any house. It had caved in like an eggshell, and amongst the ruins nothing living or dead could be discovered, only a stench and a tarry stickiness. The Elmer Frys had been erased from Dunwich. And that's the end of chapter 7.
I've been killed by a rabbit.
Yeah. It's sad when a franchise comes to an end. Okay, but now on to chapter 8. In the meantime, a quieter, yet even more spiritually poignant phase of the horror had been blackly unwinding itself behind the closed doors of a shelf-lined room in Arkham. The curious manuscript record, or diary of Wilbur Whately delivered to Miskatonic University for translation had caused much worry and bafflement among the experts in languages, both ancient and modern. Its very alphabet, notwithstanding a general resemblance to the heavily shaded Arabic used in Mesopotamia, being absolutely unknown to any available authority. The final conclusion of the linguists was that the text represented an artificial alphabet, giving the effect of a cipher. Though none of the usual methods of cryptographic solution seem to furnish any clue, even when applied to the basis of every tongue the writer might conceivably have used. The ancient... Yeah, the ancient books taken from Whately's quarters, while absorbingly interesting and in several cases promising to open up new and terrible lines of research among philosophers and men of science, were of no assistance whatever in this matter. One of them, a heavy tome with an iron clasp, was in another unknown alphabet. This one, of a different cast and resembling Sanskrit more than anything else. The old ledger was at length given wholly into the charge of Dr. Armitage, both because of his peculiar interest in the Whately matter and because of his wide linguistic learning and skill in the mystical formulae of antiquity and the Middle Ages. Armitage had an idea that the alphabet might be something esoterically used by certain forbidden cults, which have come down from old times and which have inherited many forms and traditions from the wizards of the Saracenic world. I'm not familiar with that word, so yeah. That question, however, he did not deem vital, since it would be unnecessary to know the origin of the symbols if, as he suspected, they were used as cipher in a modern language. It was his belief that, considering the great amount of text involved, the writer would scarcely have wished the trouble of using another speech than his own, save perhaps in certain special formulae and incantations. Accordingly, he attacked the manuscript with the preliminary assumption that the bulk of it was in English. Dr. Armitage knew, from the repeated failures of his colleagues, that the riddle was a deep and complex one, and that no simple mode of solution could merit even a trial. All through late August he fortified himself with the massed lore of cryptography, drawing upon the fullest resources of his own library, and waiting night after night amidst the arcana of Trithemius, Polygraphia, Giambattista Portas, De Furtivis Liberatum Notis, De Vigeneres Traite, Des Cifres, Falkners, Cryptomenusis Patefacta, Davis and Thicknesses, 18th century treatise. Wow, that's a great last name. Thickness. And such fairly modern authorities as Blair, von Martin, and Kluber's Cryptographique. I said it like that because that guy's definitely German. He even has an umlaut over the U, yeah? He interspersed his study of the books with attacks on the manuscript itself, and in time became convinced that he had to deal with one of those subtlists. Oh my god. Subtlist. Wow. Subtlist. Wow. Yeah. And most ingenious.
Try saying that 3 times.
Yeah, no, I will not. And most ingenious of cryptograms. Yeah, because it's, subtlest, but I keep saying subtlests, like as in plural. So yeah, that's what I was doing there. In which many separate lists of corresponding letters are arranged like the multiplication table, and the message built up with arbitrary keywords known only to the initiated. The older authorities seemed rather more helpful than the newer ones. And Armitage concluded that the code of the manuscript was one of great antiquity, no doubt handed down through a long line of mystical experimenters. Several times he seemed near daylight, only to be set back by some unforeseen obstacle. Then, as September approached, the clouds began to clear. Certain letters, as used in certain parts of the manuscript, emerged definitely and unmistakably, and it became obvious that the text was indeed in English. On the evening of September 2nd, the last major barrier gave away, and Dr. Armitage read for the first time a continuous passage of Wilbur Whately's annals. It was in truth a diary, as all had thought, and it was couched in a style clearly showing the mixed occult eruditation and general illiteracy of the strange being who wrote it. Wow. Almost the first long passage that Armitage deciphered, and the entry dated November 26, 1916, proved highly startling and disquieting. It was written, he remembered, by a child of 3.5 who looked like a lad of 12 or 13.
Today learned the Aklo of the Sabaoth,
It ran.
which did not like it being answerable from the hill and not from the air, that upstairs more ahead of me than I had thought it would be, and is not like to have much earth brain.
Yeah, this is funny because this is this is not written in the hillbilly style because he's reading it from the pages.
Shot Elam Hutchins' collie Jack when he went to bite me, and Elam says he would kill me if he does. I guess he won't. Grandfather kept me saying the toll formula last night, and
I think I saw the inner...
2 eggs, 3 apples.
No, dough in this case, DHO. Dough formula. That's pretty funny.
And I think I saw the inner city at the 2 magnetic poles. I shall go to those poles when the earth is cleared off, if I can't break through with the...
Yeah, because Santa owes me.
with the Do-Na formula when I commit it. They from the air told me at Sabbath that it will be years before I can clear off the earth, and I guess grandfather will be dead then. So I shall have to learn all the angles of the planes and all the formulas between the...
That's so funny because of what's in the page next. And
I have to learn all the angles of the planes and all the formulas between the and the nerg.
I'm doing my best here because it's literally spelled NHHNGR. No vowels.
They from outside will help, but they cannot take body without human blood. That upstairs looks it will have to have the right cast. I can see it a little when I make the Vorish sign or blow the powder of Imgahazi at it. And it is near like them that May Eve on the hill. The other faiths may wear off some. I wonder how I shall look when the earth is cleared and there are no earth beings on it. He that came with the Aklo-Sabath, I said I may be transfigured. There being much of outside to work on.
Morning found Dr. Armitage in a cold sweat of terror and frenzy, of wakeful concentration. He had not left the manuscript all night, but sat at his table under the electric light, turning the page after page with shaking hands, as fast as he could decipher the cryptic text. He had nervously telephoned his wife that he would not be home, and when he brought him a breakfast from the house, he could scarcely dispose of a mouthful. All that day he read on, now and then halted maddeningly as a reapplication of the complex key became necessary. Lunch and dinner were brought him, but he ate only the smallest fraction of either. Towards the middle of the next night, he drowsed off in his chair. What?
Sorry, I thought he was going to say drowned.
No, he drozed off. Sorry, I read that badly, yeah. He drozed off in his chair, yep. But soon woke out of a tangle of nightmares almost as hideous as the truth and menaces to man's existence that he had uncovered. On the morning of September 4th, Professor Rice and Dr. Morgan insisted on seeing him for a while, and departed trembling in ashen gray. That evening he went to bed, but slept only fitfully. Wednesday, the next day, he was back at the manuscript and began to take copious notes, both from the current sections and from those he had already deciphered. In the small hours of that night, he slept a little in the easy chair in his office, but was at the manuscript again before dawn. Sometime before noon, his physician, Dr. Hartwell, called to see him and insisted that he cease work. He refused, intimidating, intimating that it was of the most vital importance for him to complete the reading of the diary, and promising an explanation in due course time. That evening, just as twilight fell, he finished the terrible perusal and sank back exhausted. His wife, bringing his dinner, found him in a half-comatose state, but he was conscious enough to warn her off with a sharp cry when he saw her eyes wander towards the notes he had taken.
Don't read those, it's too spicy for you. You'll learn about human elements and tentacles and eyeballs.
Yeah. Yeah, that is the normal reaction of somebody who's been exposed to tentacle porn for the first time. Weakly rising, he gathered up the scribbled papers and sealed them all in the great envelope, which he immediately placed in his inside coat pocket. He had sufficient strength to get home, but was so clearly in need of medical aid that Dr. Hartwell was summoned at once. As the doctor put him to bed, he could only mutter over and over, "But what in God's name can we do?" Dr. Armitage slept, but was partly delirious the next day. He made no explanations to Hartwell, but in his calmer moments spoke of the imperative need of a long conference with Rice and Morgan. His wilder wanderings were very startling indeed, including frantic appeals that something in a boarded-up farmhouse be destroyed, and fantastic references to some plan for the extirpation of the entire human race and all animal and vegetable life from the earth by some terrible elder race of beings from another dimension.
Save the carrots from the old ones.
Wow, I like that one. He would shout that the world was in danger, since the elder things wished to strip it and drag it away from the solar system and cosmos matter into some other plane and phase of entity from which it had once fallen. Whoa. Okay. Sorry. Okay, I think I know how to say this. Vigitillions of eons ago. I'm not sure that's a real number, but okay. At other times he would call for the dreaded Necronomicon and the Demonolatria of Remigius, in which he seemed hopeful of finding some formula to check the peril he conjured up. Stop them, he would shout. Those Whateleys meant to let them in, and the worst of all is left. Tell Rice and Morgan we must do something. It's a blind business, but I know how to make the powder. It hasn't been fed since the 2nd of August, when Wilbur came here to his death. And at that rate, but Armitage had a sound physique despite his 73 years, and slept off his disorder that night without developing any real fever. He woke late Friday, clear of head, though sober.
Wow! Sorry, I was just Dr. Googling when you're talking about numbers. Vigitillion is a real one.
Oh, okay. So how many millions is that?
How many millions? It's oh my gosh. Well, it's not as many as a centillion, but it's the one below. It's
okay.
like 10 with like a little 6 free in the
power to the
so that's a lot.
To the power of 16, did you say? Oh.
Power is 63.
Oh, that's really big. Okay. He woke late Friday, clear of head, though sober with a gnawing fear and tremendous sense of responsibility. Saturday afternoon, he felt able to go over to the library and summon Rice and Morgan for a conference. And the rest of that day and evening, the three men tortured their brains in the wildest speculation and most desperate debate. And more tentacle porn. I love that expression, torture your brain. Strange and terrible books were drawn voluminously from the stack shelves and from secure places of storage, and diagrams and formulae were copied with feverish haste and in bewildering abundance. of
I
skepticism.
love comic book conventions.
Yeah. Of skepticism, there was none. All three had seen the body of Wilbur Whately as it lay on the floor in a room of that very building, and after that, not one of them could feel even slightly inclined to treat the diary as madman's ravings. Opinions
Nice, good Ozzy Osbourne album, by the way.
Opinions were divided after the notifying the Massachusetts State Police, and the negative finally won. Oh, really? There were things involved which simply could not be believed by those who had not seen a sample, or as indeed was made clear during certain subsequent investigation. Late at night, the conference disbanded without having developed a definite plan, but all day Sunday, Armitage was busy comparing formulae and mixing chemicals obtained from the college laboratory.
Mixing tentacles, oh my!
Chemicals, not tentacles.
Oh.
The more I was starting to say, did I actually say tentacles? But no, it was chemicals. The more he reflected on the hellish diary, the more he was inclined to doubt the efficacy of any material agent in stamping out the entity which Wilbur Whately had left behind him. The earth-threatening entity which, unknown to him, was to burst forth in a few hours and become the memorable Dunwich Horror.
Surprise!
Monday was a repetition of Sunday, with Dr. Armitage for the task in hand required an infinity of research and experiment. Further consultations of the monstrous diary brought about various changes of plan, and he knew that even in the end a large amount of uncertainty must remain. By Tuesday he had definite line of action mapped out, and believed he would try a trip to Dunwich within a week. Then on Wednesday the great shock came. Talked obscurely away in the corner of the Arkham Advertiser was a facetious little item from the Associated Press, telling what a record-breaking monster the bootleg whiskey of Dunwich had raised up. Armitage. Armitage, half-stunned, could only telephone for Rice and Morgan. Far into the night they discussed, and the next day, as a whirlwind of preparation of the part of them all, Armitage knew he would be meddling with terrible powers, yet saw that there was no other way to annul the deeper, more malign meddling which others had done before him. Yep. And we're going again, and let's get on with Chapter 9. Friday morning, Armitage, Rice, and Morgan set out by motor for Dunwich. Arriving at the village about 1 in the afternoon. The day was pleasant, but even in the brightest sunlight, a kind of quiet dread and portent seemed to hover about the strangely domed hill and the deep, shadowy ravines of the stricken region. I almost said sticken region, and I was like, what the hell? Yeah. Now and then, on some mountain top, a gaunt circle of stones could be glimpsed against the sky. From the air of hushed fright at Osborne's store, they knew something hideous had happened, and soon learned of the annihilation of the Elmer Fry house and family. Throughout that afternoon, they rode around Dunwich, questioning the natives concerning all that had occurred, and seeing for themselves with rising pangs of horror the drear Fry ruins, and their lingering traces of the tarry stickiness, the blasphemous tracks in the Fry yard, and the wounded Seth Bishop cattle, the enormous swaths of disturbed vegetation in various places. The trail up and down Sentinel Hill seemed to Armitage of almost cataclysmic significance, and he looked long at the sinister altar-like stone on the summit. At length, the visitors are apprised of a party of state police which had come from Aylesbury that morning in response to the first telephone reports of the Fry tragedy. We're laughing because, oh god, I feel like an asshole. Decided to seek out the officers and compare notes as far as practicable. Wow, that's a funny word.
Practicable.
Yeah. This, however, they found more easily planned than performed, since no sign of the party could be found in any direction. There had been 5 of them in a car, but now the car stood empty near the ruins in the Fry yard. The natives...
That's a hell of a place to have a party.
Yeah. The natives, all of whom had talked with the policeman, seemed at first as perplexed as Armitage and his companions. Then old Sam Hutchins thought of something that turned pale, notching Fred Farr and pointing to the dank, deep hollow that yawned close by. "God!" he gasped. "I telled them to not to go down into the glen, and I never thought nobody'd do it with them tracks and the smell and the whippoorwills a screeching down there in the dark on noonday." A cold shudder ran through natives and visitors alike, and every ear seemed strained in a kind of instinctive, unconscious listening. Armitage, now that he had actually come upon the horror and its monstrous work, trembled with the responsibility he felt to be his. Night would soon fall, and it was then that the mountainous blasphemy lumbered upon the eldritch course. Negotium perambulans in tenebris. The old librarian rehearsed the formulae in he had memorized and clutched the paper containing the alternative one he had not memorized. He saw that his electric flashlight was in working order. Rice behind him took from a valise a metal sprayer of the sort used in combating insects. Whilst Morgan uncased a big game rifle on which he relied, despite his colleagues' warnings that no material weapon would be of help. Armitage, having read the hideous diary, knew painfully well what kind of manifestation to expect, but he did not add to the fright of the Dunwich people by giving any hints or clues. He hoped that it might be conquered without any revelation to the world of the monstrous thing it had escaped. To the world, the monstrous thing it had escaped. As shadows gathered, the natives commenced to disperse homeward, anxious to bar themselves indoors despite the present evidence that all human locks and bolts were useless before a force that could bend trees and crush houses when it chose. They shook their heads at the visitors' plan to stand guard at the Fry ruins near the glen, and as they left, had little expectancy of ever seeing the watchers again. There were rumblings under the hills that night, and the whippoorwills piped threateningly. Once in a while, a wind sweeping up out of Cold Spring Glen would bring a touch of ineffable fever to the heavy night air, such a fever as all 3 of the watchers had smelled once before, when they stood above a dying thing that had passed for 15 years and half as a human being, but the looked-for terror did not appear. Whatever was down in the glen was biding its time, and Armitage told his colleagues it would be suicidal to try to attack it in the dark. Morning came wanly, and the night sound ceased. It was a gray, bleak day, with now and then a drizzle of rain, and heavier and heavier clouds seemed to be piling themselves up beyond the hills to the northward, and they made weird sounds. The men from Arkham were undecided what to do, seeking shelter from the increasing rainfall beneath one of the few undestroyed Fry outbuildings. They debated the wisdom of waiting or of taking the aggressive and going down into the glen in quest of their nameless monstrous quarry. The downpour waxed in heaviness, and distant peals of thunder sounded from far around. Sheet lightning shimmered, and then sheet, not sheep. And then the forky bolt flashed near at hand, as if descending into the accursed glen itself. The sky grew.
Oh, stop flashing us! We can see your human element.
The sky grew very dark, and the watchers hoped that the storm would prove a short, sharp one, followed by clear weather. It was still gruesomely dark when, not much over an hour later, a confused babble of voices sounded down the road. It was Scooby. No. Another moment brought to a few frightened group of more than a dozen men, running, shouting, and even whimpering hysterically.
Ah! Ooh-wee! And I'm here just for the fun.
Someone in the lead began sobbing out words, and the Arkham men started violently when they... I forget sometimes that start in this case means like startled, so that's right. Started violently when those words developed a coherent form. "Oh my God, the voice choked out. "It's a going agent, and this time by day. It's out, I'm moving this very minute, and only the Lord knows when it'll be on us." The speaker panted into silence, but another took his message. "Nigh on an hour ago, the Waitley here heard a phone ringing, and it was Miss Corey, George's wife, and that lives down by the junction. She says the hired boy Luther was out driving in the cows from the storm after the big bolt, and he sees all the trees bending at the mouth of the glen, opposite side to this, and smelled the same awful smell like the smell when I found the big track last Monday morning. And he says, that's what it says. And he says, they was a swishing, lapping sound, more nor what the bended trees and bushes could make, and all of a sudden the trees along the road begun to get pushed one side, and they was awful stumping and splashing.
Timber!
And splashing in the mud. But mind you, Luther, he didn't see nothing at all. Only just the bending...
I didn't see anything.
Yeah, only just the bending trees and underbrush.
I only saw the bending trees and underbush.
Then fur ahead was Bishop Brook goes under the road and heard an awful creaking and straining on the bridge. And says he could tell the sound of wood has started. Wow. Okay. Starting to crack and split. Oh, sorry, I didn't finish the sentence. And all the whiles we never say a thing, only them trees and bushes a bending. And when the swishing sound got very far out on the road towards Wizard Waitley's and Sentinel Hill. That's kind of difficult to say with this voice. Luther, he had the guts to step up where he'd heard at first and look at the ground. It was all mud and water, and the sky was dark, and the rain was wiping about all tracks about as fast as could be. But beginning at the glen mouth, where the trees had moved, and there was still some of them awful prints big as barrels, like he's seen Monday. I mean, yeah, it's spelled BAR''LS because it's in the hillybilly.
Hillybilly.
Yes, in the hillybilly style. Yeah. At this point, the first excited speaker interrupted. But that ain't the trouble now. That was only the start. Zep here'd be calling folks up everybody was a-listening, and when the call from Seth Bishop's cut in, his housekeeper Sally was carrying home fitter to kill. She just see the trees a-bending beside the road and says that was kind of mushy sound. like like an elephant puffing and treading and heading for the house. Then she up,
I gotta get home.
then she up and spoke sudden of a fearful smell, and says her boy Chansey was a screaming as how it was just like what he smelled up the Whately Rewins Monday morning, and the dogs was all barking and whining awful. And then
Oh,
she let out a terrible yell and says
that stinks.
and the shed down the road had just caved in like the storm had blown it over, only the wind weren't strong enough to do that. Everybody was listening, and we could hear lots of folks on the wire a-gasping. All to Aunt. I'm not sure what that's supposed to be. All to Aunt Sally, she yelled again, and says the front yard picket fence had just crumpled up, though they wasn't no sign of what done it. Then everybody on the line could hear Chansey and old Seth Bishop a-yelling to, and Sally was shrieking out that something heavy had struck the house. Not lightning nor nothing, but something heavy aging again the front, and kept a launching itself again and again, though though you couldn't see nothing out of the front winders. And then lines of fright deepened on every face, and Armitage, shaken as he was, had barely poise enough to prompt the speaker. And then Sally, she yelled out, "Oh, help, the house is caving in!" And the wire, we could hear the terrible crash and the whole flock of screaming, just like when Elmer Fry's place was took, only worse. that was really funny because he wrote worse as wuss. WSS. The man paused, and another of the crowd spoke. "Oh, God." I'm getting a little sick and tired of this hillbilly talk now. It was fun for a little while, but now it's getting, That's all. Not a sound nor squeak over the phone order that. Just still.
Ladies and gentlemen, Sean Connery.
That wasn't my intention, but okay. We that heard it got out forged a wagons and rounded up as many able-bodied menfolks as we could get as Corey place and come up here to see what ye thought best to do. Not but what I think's the Lord's judgment for our iniquities, and that no mortal kin ever should aside. Armitage saw that time for positive action had come and spoke decisively to the faltering group of frightened rustics. Oh, that's a bit rude. "We must follow it, boys." He made his voice as reassuring as possible. "I believe there's a chance of putting it out of business. You men know that those Whateleys were wizards. Well, this thing is a thing of wizardry, and must be put down by the same means. I've seen Wilbur Whately's diary and read some of the strange old books he used to read, and I think I know the right kind of spell to recite to make the thing fade away. Of course,
Abracadabra.
Of course, one can't be sure, but we can always take a chance. It's invisible. I knew it would be, but there's a powder in this long-distance sprayer that might make it shoo up for a second. Later on.
Go away.
Later on, we'll try it. It's a frightful thing to have alive, but it isn't as bad as what Wilbur would have let in if he'd lived longer. You'll never know what the world has escaped. They keep using the word escape in a really weird way in this, and it kind of keeps weirding me out. Now we're only this one thing to... What? Now we've only this one thing to fight. Okay. And it can't multiply. It can, though, do a lot of harm, so we mustn't hesitate to rid the community of it. We must follow it, and the way to begin is to go to the place that has just been wrecked. Let somebody lead the way. I don't know your roads very well, and I've an idea that there might be a shorter cut across lots. How about it? The men shuffled about a moment, and then Earl Sawyer spoke softly. Pointing with a grimy finger through the steadily lessening rain. I guess ye can get to Seth Bishop's quickest by cutting across the lower meadow here. wading the brook at the low place and climbing through carriers mowing and timber lot beyond. That comes out on the upper road, mighty nice sits, little other side. Armitage with Rice and Morgan started to walk in the direction indicated, and most of the natives followed slowly. The sky was growing lighter, and there were signs that the storm had worn itself away. When Armitage inadvertently took a wrong direction, Joe Osborne warned him and walked ahead to show the right one. Courage and confidence were mounting, though the twilight of the almost perpendicular wooded hill, which lay towards the end of their shortcut, and among those fantastic ancient trees, they had to scramble as if up a ladder. But these qualities put these qualities to a severe test. At length they emerged on a muddy road to find the sun coming out. They were a little beyond the Seth Bishop place, but bent trees and hideously unmistakable tracks shewed what had passed by. Only a few moments were consumed by surveying the ruins just around the bend. It was the Fry incident all over again.
Oh, there not another place burned down. I wanted my steak.
And nothing dead and living was found in either of the collapsed shells which had been the Bishop house and barn. No one cared to remain where amidst the stench and tarry stickiness, but all turned instinctively to the line of horrible prints leading on towards the wrecked Whately farmhouse and the altar-crowned slopes of Sentinel Hill. As the men passed the sight of Wilbur Whately's abode, they shuddered visibly, and seemed again to mix hesitancy with their zeal. It was no joke tracking down something as big as a house that one could not see, but that had all the vicious malevolence of a demon. Opposite the base of Sentinel Hill, the tracks left the road, and there was a fresh bending and matting visible along the broad swath marking the monster's former route to from the summit. Armitage produced a pocket telescope of a considerable power and scanned the steep green side of the hill. Then he handed the instrument to Morgan, and also the telescope, and whose side was keener. After a moment of gazing, Morgan cried out sharply, passing the glass to Earl Sawyer and indicating a certain spot on the slope with his finger. Sawyer, as clumsy as most non-users of optical devices are, fumbled a while, but evidently focused the lenses with Armitage's aid. When he did so, his cry was less restrained than Morgan's had been. God almighty, the grass and bushes is a-movin'. It's a-goin' up, slow-like, creepin' up there the top of this minute. Heaven only knows what for. Then the germ of panic seemed to spread among the seekers. It was one thing to chase the nameless entity, but quite another to find it. Spells might be all right, but suppose they weren't. Voices began questioning Armitage about what he knew of the thing, and no reply seemed to quite satisfy. Everyone seemed to feel himself in close proximity to phases of nature and being utterly forbidden and wholly outside the sane experience of mankind. All right, and now we're finally starting up the final chapter, the 10th chapter. Yes, and then it's going to be the end of the story. In the end, the three men of Arkham, old white-bearded Dr. Armitage, stocky iron-gray Professor Rice, and lean, youngish Dr. Morgan. Youngish, okay? Yeah, ran out of descriptors there. Ascended the mountain alone. After much patient instruction regarding its focusing and use, they left the telescope with the frightened group that remained in the road. And as they climbed, they were watched closely by those among whom the glass was passed around. It was hard going, and Armitage had to be helped more than once. High above the toiling group, the great swath trembled, and as its hellish maker repassed with snake-like deliberateness, then it was obvious that the pursuers were gaining. Oh, nice. That's a callback. Curtis Whately, of the Undecayed branch, was holding the telescope when the Arkham party detoured radically from the swath. He told the crowd that the men were evidently trying to get to a subordinate peak, which overlooked the swath at a point considerably ahead of where the shrubbery was now bending. This indeed proved to be true, and the party were seen to gain the minor elevation only a short time after the invisible blasphemy had passed it. Then Wesley Corey, who had taken the glass, cried out that Armitage was adjusting the sprayer which Rice held, and that something must be about to happen. The crowd stirred uneasily, recalling that this sprayer was expected to give the unseen horror a moment of visibility. 2 or 3 men shut their eyes, and Curtis Whately snatched back the telescope and strained his vision to the utmost. He saw that Rice, from the party's point of vantage, above and behind the entity, had an excellent chance of spreading the potent powder with marvelous effect. Those without the telescope saw only an instant flash of gray cloud, a cloud about the size of a moderately large building near the top of the
So
mountain.
he fumigated him.
Yeah. Curtis, who had held the instrument, dropped it with a piercing shriek into the ankle-deep mud of the road. He reeled. He reeled and would have crumpled to the ground had not 2 or 3 others seized and steadied him. All he could do was moan, half inaudibly. Oh, great God, that. There was a pandemonium in questioning, and only Henry Wheeler thought to rescue the fallen telescope and wipe it clean of mud. Curtis was past all coherence, and even isolated replies were almost too much for him. Bigger in a barn, all made of skirmin ropes. Whole thing sort of shaped like a hen's egg, bigger than anything. Wow, a hen's egg, really. With dozen of legs like hogs' head that half shut up when they step. Nothing solid about it, all like jelly, and made of separate wriggling ropes pushed close together. Great bulging eyes all over it, 10 or 20 mouths or trunks sticking out all along the sides. Yep.
Just a warning to the listeners out there, this book is getting sexy again.
Big as stovepipes and all tossing and opening and shutting. Ooh, baby, yeah. All grey with kind of blue and purple rings. Oh, God in heaven, that half face on top. The final memory, whatever it was, proved too much for poor Curtis, and he collapsed completely before he could say more. Fred Farr and Will Hutchins.
He collapsed before he could talk about his human element.
Oh, God. Fred Farr and Will Hutchins carried him to the roadside and laid him on the damp grass. Henry Wheeler turned the rescue telescope to the mountain to see what he might. Yeah, through the lenses were 3 tiny discernible figures, apparently running toward the summit as fast as the steep incline allowed. Only these, nothing more. Then everyone noticed a strangely unseasonable noise in the deep valley behind, and even in the underbrush of Sentinel Hill itself. It was the piping of unnumbered whippoorwills, and in their shrill chorus there seemed to lurk a note of tense and evil expectancy. Earl Sawyer now took the telescope and reported that the 3 figures, as standing on the topmost ridge, virtually level with the altar stone, but at a considerable distance from it. One figure, he said, seemed to be raising its hands above its head at rhythmic intervals.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
And as Sawyer mentioned, the circumstances...
That explains the smell, doesn't it, as well?
Okay. And circumstance the crowd seemed to hear a faint, half musical sound from the distance, as if a loud chant were accompanying the gestures. The weird silhouette on that remote peak must have been a spectacle of infinite grotesqueness and impressiveness, but no observer was in the mood for aesthetic appreciation. "I guess he's saying the spell," whispered Wheeler. "Oh, I guess he's saying the spell," whispered Wheeler, as he snatched back the telescope. The whippoorwills were piping wildly, and in a singularly curious, irregular rhythm, quite unlike
Boom, 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 boom.
that of the visible ritual. Suddenly the sunshine seemed to lessen without the intervention of any discernible cloud. It was a very peculiar phenomenon, and was plainly marked by all. A rumbling sound seemed brewing beneath the hills, mixed strangely with the concordant rumbling which clearly came from the sky. Lightning flashed aloft, and the wondering crowd looked in vain for the portents of storm. The chanting of the men from Arkham now became unmistakable, and Wheeler saw through the glass that they were all raising their hands in the rhythmic incantation.
Look in the sky! It's a bird! It's a plane!
From some farmhouse far away came the frantic barking of dogs.
Woof!
The change in the quality of the daylight increased, and the crowd gazed about the horizon in wonder. The purplish darkness, born of nothing more than spectral deepening of the sky's blue, pressed down upon the rumbling hills, and the lightning flashed again, somewhat brighter than before. And the crowd fancied that it had shewed a certain mistiness around the altar stone in the distant height. No one, however, had been using the telescope at that distance. The whippoorwills continued their irregular pulsation, and the men of Dunwich braced themselves tensely against some imponderable menace with which the atmosphere seemed surcharged. Without warning came those deep, cracked, raucous vocal sounds which will never leave the memory of the stricken group who heard them. Not from any human throat were they born. From the organs of a man can yield no such acoustic perversions. Rather, one have said that they came from the pit itself, had not their source been so unmistakably the altar stone on the peak. It is almost erroneous to call them sounds at all, since so much of their ghastly infrabass timbre spoke to the dim seats of consciousness and terror far subtler than the ear, and yet one must do so, since their form was indisputably thought vaguely of that of half-articulate words. They were loud as the rumblings and the thunder above which they echoed, and yet did they come from no visible being, and because imagination might suggest a conjectural source in the world of non-visible beings, the huddled crowd at the mountain's base huddled still closer and winced as if in expectation of a blow.
Ignai, Tifilingna, Yoksotath,
rang the hideous croaking sound of space.
Iska, Heya, Nagaradla.
Sorry, I'm trying my best again, because, again, there's no vowels at all in that last one. It's NGRKDL''LH. It's like a cat walked on the keyboard. Yeah, basically.
Oh, hail Cthulhu.
Yeah, Cthulhu. The speaking impulse seemed to falter here, as if some frightful psychic struggle were going on. Henry Wheeler strained his eyes at the telescope, but saw only the three grotesquely silhouetted human figures on the peak, all moving their arms furiously in strange gestures, as their incantations drew near its culmination. From what black wells of acherontic fear of feeling, from that unplumbed gulfs of extra-cosmic consciousness, an obscure, long-latent heredity, were those half-articulate thunder-croakings drawn. Presently they began to gather renewed force and coherence as they grew in stark, utter, ultimate frenzy.
Naga, hey, help, father, Yoksotath.
But that was all. The pallid group in the road, still reeling at the indisputably English syllables that had poured thickly and thunderously down from the frantic vacancy beside the shocking altar stone, were never to hear such syllables again. Instead, they jumped violently at the terrific report which seemed to rend the hills, the deafening cataclysmic peal whose source, be it inner earth or sky, no hero was ever able to place. A single lightning bolt shot from the purple zenith to the altar stone, and a great tidal wave of viewless force and indescribable stench swept down from the hill to all the countryside. Trees, grass, and underbrush were whipped into a fury, and the frightened crowd at the mountain's base, weakened by the lethal feeder that seemed about to asphyxiate them, were almost hurled off their feet. Dogs howled from the distance. Green grass and foliage wilted to a curious sickly yellow-gray, and over field and forest were scattered the bodies of dead whippoorwills. The stench left quickly, but the vegetation never came right again. To this day, there is something queer and unholy about the roads on and around the fearsome hill. Curtis Whately was only just regaining consciousness when the Arkham men came slowly down the mountain in the beams of sunlight, once more brilliant and untainted. They were grave and quiet, and seemed shaken by memories and reflections even more terrible than those which had reduced the group of natives to a state of cowed quivering. In reply to a jumble of questions, they only shook their heads and reaffirmed one vital fact. The thing was gone forever, Armitage said. It has been split up into what it was originally made of, and can never exist again. It was an impossibility in a normal world. Only the last fraction was really matter in any sense we know. It was like its father, and most of it has gone back to him in some vague realm or dimension outside our material universe. Some vague abyss, out of which only the most accursed rites of human blasphemy could ever have called him for a moment on the hills. There was a brief silence, and in that pause, the scattered senses of poor Curtis Whately began to knit back into a sort of continuity, so that he put his hands to his head with a moan. Memory seemed to pick itself up where it had left off, and the horror of the sight that had prostrated him burst into upon him again. Oh my God, that half face on top of it, that face with the red eyes and the crinkly albino hair, and no chin like the Whateleys. It was an octopus, a centipede, spider kind of thing, but there was half-shaved a man's face on top of it, and it looked like Wizard Whately's, only it was yards and yards across. He paused exhausted as the whole group of natives stared in a bewilderment not quite crystallized into fresh terror. Only old Zebulon Whately, who wonderingly remembered ancient things but who had been silent theretofore, spoke aloud. 15 years agone, he rambled. I heard old Whately say as how some day we'd hear a child of Lavinia's callin' its father's name on top of Sentinel Hill. But Joe Osborne interrupted him to question the Arkham men anew. What was it anyhow? And however did young Wizard Whately call it out of the air it come from? Armitage chose his words very carefully. It was mostly a kind of force that doesn't belong in our part of space. A kind of force that acts and grows and shapes itself by other laws than those of our sort of nature. We have no business calling in such things from outside. The only very wicked people and very wicked cults ever try to. There was some of it in Wilbur Whately himself. Enough to make a devil and a precocious monster of him, and to make his passing out a pretty terrible sight. I'm going to burn his accursed diary, and if you men are wise, you'll dynamite the altar stone by there, and pull down all the rings of standing stones on the other hills. Things like that brought down the beings those Whateleys were so fond of, and the beings were going to let intangibly to wipe out the human race and drag the earth off to some nameless place of some nameless purpose. But as to this thing we've just sent back, The Whateleys raised it for a terrible part in the doings that were to come. It grew fast and big, for the same reason that Wilbur grew fast and big. But it beat him because it had a greater share of the outsideness in it. You needn't ask how Wilbur called it out of the air. He didn't call it out. It was his twin brother, but it looked more like the father than he did. The end. All right. That was quite the story. How did you feel about that story?
Well, I can certainly see where a lot of other horror movies take its inspiration from now.
Yeah, exactly. So a little bit of a clarification. So I said that there is a movie made of this. It was made in 1970. It was produced by Roger Corman.
That means it's got a lot of boobies in it, doesn't it?
It has a bit of a sensual feel, yes, but it is mostly pretty close to the novel. The main thing that it changes is that apparently in that, Wilbur Whately is like a Giga Chad. Yeah, so he's like very handsome and, seduces like a woman in it. So yeah, exactly what you were thinking about with Roger Corman. Yeah. I've only seen the trailer of that, but it actually looks like a lot of fun. I really do want to check it out. And it does have like Dr. Armitage and all the other characters as well. I mean, can you see why I love this story though? It has a lot of great parts, a lot of action too.
It's a real fun one too.
Yeah, exactly. That's I think easily one of my favorites, definitely. And yeah. Oh, and also there is a second movie version of this I found out that was made in 2009. It looks like a kind of bargain bin DVD, straight to DVD crap. Yeah, it looked really bad. No. Yeah, it looked really, really bad. It's more period accurate. The thing with the 70s one is that I think it's supposed to be set in the modern day, as in like the late 60s, early 70s. But yeah, that other one was trying to be like more period accurate, but. Yeah, I also saw the trailer for that and it looked really bad. And also, okay, something else about this book. We've mentioned in some of the, I think maybe in one of the podcasts, but definitely in one of the earlier Unnamed Horrors, we've mentioned this author called Machen. Do you remember that name?
No.
Yeah. Well, the Machen was an author who was contemporary with Lovecraft, but much better remembered. Much better known, and Lovecraft was a huge fan. Machen is kind of like another one of these guys who is also credited for ushering in like the modern horror fiction, and though he was Lovecraft's contemporary, but you might remember Lovecraft wasn't very popular when he was alive. His works became much more popular later in life. But this story, Dunwich Horror, is apparently is basically like a huge like a homage to one of Machen's books. I forget which one it is. It's not. He mentions the great god Pan in like the first half. That's one of Machen's books, but I'm not sure it's that one. But basically, Machen wrote a lot of stories about like people who lived in the woods as recluses, and then as the story goes on, people start to discover that there's something unnatural about them and supernatural about them. So a lot of these things in Dunwich Horror are like direct references and kind of like homages to Machen because Lovecraft was such a huge fanboy of his. How did you feel about the hillbillies now?
Just as creepy.
Yeah.
Granted, these aren't chainsaw slinging hillbillies.
No. Yeah, exactly. I wasn't. Well, I guess the chainsaw technically had been invented, but it wasn't like in common use yet.
Mm-hmm.
No. Yeah, but definitely like reading that long segment with that one hillbilly lady. Yeah, that got a little tiresome. Like, yeah, that's definitely something that maybe doesn't require. Maybe live reading wasn't a big idea, but also it was pretty late in the story. So this is going to be a pretty long episode, I gotta say. Though this might actually have been a bit longer than the first half. So I maybe miscalculated this pages, but I'm going to make this all one big podcast regardless. Yeah. So yeah, I guess I don't really have much else to add to this. I mean, I this was a long time coming. I really love that story. I really love all this Yog Sothoth thing, and you could kind of tell like this was kind of Lovecraft at his most like refined, I think, already at this point. Like there are a lot of like great elements. There are some silly elements, definitely, But I think, those just add to the fun of reading this story. Exactly, yeah. I guess we will end this Unnamed Horror. Thank you for listening, if you are still indeed listening. And join us next time. We still have a lot of Lovecraft stories that we can do, even if we don't do the Color Out of Space. Maybe we'll pick a slightly shorter one next time. Yeah, exactly. But any last words for the audience, Kaiser?
Don't summon demons, they'll fuck you up.
Exactly. And watch out for tentacle porn.
and keep your human element in check.
Yeah, exactly. we kind of went off the rails already on that first chapter, didn't we? All right, hey, but so thank you for listening, and an ik tulufatagan to all.